Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. This is the second of 3 episodes I'm going to bring you this morning. I have 5 articles in this episode, and all of the URLs are in the description of the video for your convenience. The first one we have here is off of Zero Hedge. Massive network of ISIS sleeper cells spanning United States uncovered, training camps and all. And we'll get this to scan up here. Hamster's running a little slow here. This one says, how's your weekend going? Redditor Law School graduate and nimble navigator William Craddock, brand new Twitter handle, is pleading the YIF, and that's YIFF, has made quite the name for himself on Reddit's The Donald Forum. In just 3 short months, Craddock has managed to rack up over 153,000 post karma and 48,000 comment karma, which, if you're not familiar, is impressive. The guy is an incredibly effective dot connector, perhaps owing it to his legal training, often posting lengthy reads that are well worth the investment in time. Craddock made the Clinton, Silsby, Hyatt, or Haiti connection, which is unrefuted to the best of my knowledge. In his latest piece, Craddock presents frightening evidence of a massive ISIS network covering the USA. Let's start with the conclusion. It says, either the U.S. government and current administration is so hopelessly incompetent that they're unable to detect domestic and foreign threats which are discoverable by investigative journalists and whistleblower organizations, or there are factions within the United States government who are seeking to prevent competent, well-intentioned members of the intelligence community, law enforcement, and legislative regulatory branches from taking action against ISIS operatives and extremist recruits who are active both on the American border as well as in the United States. And then it says dig in, and there's 2 links that you can click on here. One is a massive stock market rally at our doorsteps, and then let's see, new economies are developing in emergency markets like India and China. Okay, well, and then the article goes on. It says, abstract, the director of the FBI, James Comey, has stated that ISIS now has a presence in all 50 of the United States. ABC 7 News Chicago, and there is a link there that you can click on. It says, this presence varies in its form from state to state. It exists in the form of smaller cells attached to mosques run by radicalized imams, primarily, or try that again, paramilitary groups operating out of compounds throughout the U.S., reinforced by veterans and command figures from ISIS, Syria, theater, and bolstered by recruits from American minority communities. If all the reports outlined here are in fact found to be true, ISIS has managed to amass a terrifyingly impressive network across the United States that would be capable of wreaking heavy damage in the event of large-scale terror incidents. Number 1 is the training camps. One of the ways ISIS has established a military presence in the U.S. is by directly franchising out training camps that build operations centers or cells in various parts of the country. Some of these camps are public knowledge, although the media has tried to hide them from the public. At least one established network of paramilitary training camps has been public knowledge since at least the 1980s. The Jamaat ul-Faqra, or Muslims of America network, has run a network of camps estimated in a report from Sean Hannity to be spread across 35 different locations. The report linked here shows a number of Islamic jihadist-style military training videos filmed at these sites in the United States. News site WND has placed the number of camps at least 22. And there is a link that you can go to check that out. It says here's a map showing the location of most of the compounds run by Jamaat ul-Faqra. And there's another link. It says the Clarion Project ran a report citing FBI documents which state that in 2014, the FBI investigated the organization based upon specific articulate facts given justification to believe they are engaged in international terrorism or activities in preparation thereof. This was due in part to an accidental deadly shooting that occurred in one of their compounds, Momendberg in Texas. There is an FBI document that you can click a link to see, and it says Momendberg was one of several compounds located on property Jamaat el-Faqwa had purchased in the area. Then there's a link to Clarion, so you can check that out. It says Jamaat el-Faqwa was based in Pakistan, and its leader Mubarak Ali Gilani was directly involved in kidnapping and murder of journalist Daniel Pearl, who was kidnapped while going to interview Gilani in Iraq. He was questioned but never arrested for the role he played. And there's another link you can click on. You will recall, of course, that the group who carried out the murder of Pearl was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which was the forerunner of ISIS. This indicates that ISIS had established connections to the network, in particular since at least 2002. Hannity's report and the piece by WND both mention the fact that Jamaat al-Faqwa has produced a video titled Soldiers of Allah, where Gilani states, "We are fighting to destroy the enemy. We are dealing with evil at its roots, and its roots are America." Despite all of the troubling information, the Department of State does not list Jamaat al-Faqwa as a terrorist organization. Here's a list of videos both showing footage these Islamic jihadist paramilitary groups have filmed or reports referencing them. And there's 4 videos that you can click on to watch there. It says it appears that there may be a correlation between the states where camps run by Jamaat al-Faqwa are located and recent terror attacks which have linked to ISIS. For example, one of the largest compounds is located in Islamberg, New York. Many of the training and propaganda films made by Jamaat el-Faqwa are produced at this location. It's interesting that the particular location is so significant to the group when one considers terror activity in the New York, New Jersey area, such as the recent pressure cooker bombings. And there are 3 links that you can click on after this. 2 of them are from the Telegraph and one's from the Washington Post. The article continues. It says the authorities attempted to claim that the individual arrested, Ahmad Khan Rami, acted alone and there was no cell, but that contradicts other prior reports, complete with footage showing multiple other individuals who were active in the terror operation. Then there's a link that you can click on from CNN, an archive. It says the lone wolf narrative pushed by the mainstream media is a lie in almost every single case. Wherever there is a lone wolf, there's a bigger wolf pack nearby, providing logistical and operational support. We've all seen the damage that individual attackers have caused in various terror incidents and how much chaos an entire squad of ISIS operatives, such as those who perpetuated the 2015 Paris attacks, can cause. Imagine what will happen when all of them decide to attack at once. The death toll in each location might potentially be in the hundreds, if not thousands. It is also interesting to note that these pressure cooker attacks happened at the tail end of a spree of gas leak explosions in New York. The most recent one occurred in September and was first blamed on a marijuana growing operation, then a meth lab, showing apparent law enforcement confusion as to what and who had actually caused the blast. Others mention that residents didn't actually smell a gas leak before the explosion. The shifting stories and common stated causes of the explosion are very interesting. When done intentionally, this is known as a supplement narrative, or a cover story that the public is more likely to accept than what really happened. Here's a number of local news reports on the incident. One off of the Gothamist that you can click the link to, one off the New York Daily News, one off of WKRC Cincinnati, one off of Pix 11 TV. And the article continues. In addition to Jamaat al-Faqih, other Islamic groups in the United States are Dar al-Hadra Islamic Center, the Islamic Circle of North America, ICNA, Masjid at Tawa, led by Surja Wajah, and I'm sure I'm butchering all these names all to pieces because I'm not Middle Eastern, but okay, I'm giving it my best shot. And the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR. I have not yet researched these other groups. I'm not alleging that they are paramilitary in nature and merely list them for referential purposes. Number 2, using mosque as centers for radicalization. In addition to training camps, domestic ISIS terrorists seem to have been groomed to some extent at local mosques by extremist umans. It is, of course, not logistically tenable to have paramilitary wings located in every single U.S. state. In such cases, smaller cells coordinated by handlers preaching extremist Wahhabist or Salafist Islam are a much more secure and low-profile option. Mosques in Europe have been proved to be at risk of being cooped by jihadi groups for use as operation centers. In the aftermath of the Paris terror attacks, French authorities raided a number of mosques and made more than 200 arrests, confiscating 334 weapons, of which 34 were described as war grade. The raids led to the closure of over 100 mosques in France. And then there is a link to Al Jihad that you can watch. There, and the article goes on. It says American security officials have also highlighted that many mosques in the states are involved to some extent with extremism. Breitbart cited a former FBI counterterrorism special agent as opting that as many as 75% of American mosques were used by jihadist networks. Breitbart has a link where you can go and check something out there, and it says the Hamas and the mosques of specific lone wolf attackers in the U.S. have been suspected of having varying levels of involvement in their radicalization process. The Los Angeles cleric Roshan Jamir Abbasi, who ministered to San Bernardino terror attackers, was questioned after it emerged he had exchanged a flurry of text with attacker Said Rizwan Farouk and was allegedly lying about the fact that he knew his wife. And there's a link for the New York Post. In Revelation, suggesting evidence that mosques can and do play host to more than one radicalized attacker, it was revealed that Pulse nightclub attacker Omar Mateen and American suicide bomber Moner Abu Shalah both were enrolled in the radical cleric Marcus Dwayne Robertson's Timbuktu Seminary. And there's a link for the Daily Mail. And it says, in the aftermath of the Pulse shooting, the imam of Husseini Islamic Center was caught on camera calling for death to gays. And there is a link to WFTV9. Actually, there's 2 links there. It says the imam of the Boston Marathon bombers, Abdullah Faru, denied radicalizing them despite videos emerging of him making fiery sermons alluding to committing acts of violence. New also surfaced that he was on the radar of the groups monitoring preachers of extremism before the attacks occurred. There is a link for Fox News. It says more moderate imams also spoke to the press, talking about how extremist clerics had taken over many Boston mosques in recent years. And another link from Fox News. It says it has also been revealed by a report by the Gateway Pundit that yesterday's airport shooter, Esteban Santiago, lived within walking distance of the only mosque in Alaska. As more information emerges about the cleric running this facility, will we find out that he too has a history of preaching extreme Islamic ideology? And there's a link to the Gateway Pundit. It says number 3, smuggling Syrian veterans and command figures into the U.S. Says ISIS operatives' presence and activity are now being routinely reported at the southern U.S. border while developing domestic paramilitary capabilities. ISIS and groups collaborating with them are attempting to move military assets, including combat veterans and command figures, from the Syrian Iraqi theaters into the West. These redeployments are likely rapidly increasing as regional and international coalitions have been closing in on their Middle East territories. ISIS movements into Europe among the refugee population are already fairly well documented. Not so well known are the growing number of reports that ISIS members are getting into the Western Hemisphere and infiltrating the United States. In 2015, Judicial Watch ran a series of reports based on testimony from various Mexican military sources stating that ISIS was running a small camp just a few miles from the border of Texas near El Paso. And there's a link to Judicial Watch. The watchdog further claimed that ISIS was paying multiple cartel organizations to smuggle members across the U.S. border using rural smuggling routes and regional airports to avoid the U.S. Border Patrol. And there's another link for Judicial Watch, and it says they support their sources with a leaked document from the Texas Department of Public Safety stating that several known members of Islamic terrorist organizations have been apprehended attempting to enter the U.S. in recent years. And there is a link to the Texas DPS document. Additionally cited was 2004 document from the Department of State, which stated that multiple known Arab extremists were using Mexico to enter the United States, including a top Al-Qaeda operative, Adnan G. L. Shurjuma, who was wanted by the FBI, and another link for Judicial Watch. These reports follow a 2014 project conducted by a Judicial Watch documenting the existence of an operation stretching from the southern border to Chicago being run by cartel and ISIS members to move drugs, weapons, and individuals from Mexico into the U.S. This is especially interesting considering the fact that the recent Fort Lauderdale attacker was Hispanic. Judicial Watch has another link. It says this year, Judicial Watch reported that they had been tipped off by Homeland Security official that cartel groups were helping multiple ISIS members, including leadership figure Shaka Mahmoud Omar Kabir, enter the United States to conduct surveillance for an attack on American soil. And there's another link for Judicial Watch. And it says in April 2016, Kabir bragged to Italian newspaper, the Giornale, that it would be easy for him to get in with a handful of men and kill thousands of people in Texas or in Arizona in the space of a few hours. Judicial Watch quoted Mexican officials who were incredulous that Obama administration was not taking these threats more seriously. Judicial Watch reports were denied by Texas DPS Director Robert Badish. However, the language Mr. Badish indicates that his denial is in fact untrue, though it does not legally qualify as perjury. When confronted about the two reports that Judicial Watch had obtained from Texas DPS contradicting his statement, he merely asserted that neither he nor intelligence officials could confirm the reports, and he did not accuse Judicial Watch of misquoting their other sources. Notice the language here. To explicitly deny the authenticity of the documents would be to make an untruthful statement. Hence Budish's decision to merely state that he could neither confirm nor deny their authenticity. The two reports outlined plans by ISIS operatives to attack Fort Bliss, Texas, and that 4 of their members had been detained in Texas. PolitiFact made a similar disingenuous attempt to discredit Judicial Watch's reports. The report also cited Texas DPS officials who merely said they could neither confirm nor deny the documents and sources cited by Judicial Watch. In fact, officials with El Paso Sheriff's Department expressed shock the Judicial Watch's findings before their superiors told Politico they similarly couldn't provide relevant information about the report. Again, notice that no authorities have outright denied Judicial Watch's findings. as to do so would be to commit perjury, especially if the official act in fact had knowledge suggesting that the reports and information was in fact true. Finally, Politico cited a Border Patrol official who merely cast doubt on Judicial Watch's reports before it emerged that he had left the Border Patrol in contentious circumstances. None of this refutes the findings and reports of Judicial Watch. And B, how ISIS can cross from West Africa to the Western Hemisphere. It is, in theory, actually incredibly easy for ISIS operatives and commanders to leave the theater of war in Syria and move into the Western Hemisphere, potentially linking up with paramilitary forces locating in some of the camps mentioned above. South American and Mexican drug cartels have been increasingly running drugs into West Africa using entire fleets of decrepit and unregistered cargo planes. There's a link to the Telegraph. There's a link for CNN, so you can check some of that out. It says, in order to move the drugs from West Africa to their ultimate markers in Europe, narco groups have been working to smuggle them in cooperation with multiple Islamic terror groups. These terror groups benefit financially from the arrangement. Below are reports from the United Nations and Financial Action Task Force explaining these business arrangements, in addition to an article from the Telegraph outlining the arrangements. And there's the link for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and a link for Financial Action Task Force, and a link for the Telegraph. ISIS has known franchises in West Africa, most notably Nigerian extremist groups Boko Haram. It would logistically be possible to move assets from Syria into West Africa via their franchises in Libya and jump the Atlantic into the Western Hemisphere. There's a link for the New York Times. It says ISIS estimated monthly income of 80 to 120 million US dollars, and that number relies only on what is public knowledge, also shows that it is financially possible for them to pay their way through Western smuggling networks. All that would be needed is the willingness to outbid competing state agencies reaching out to cartels in the hope that they will keep extremists out of the United States and the adjacent countries. Stuff magazine in New Zealand has a link. And it says, as a final note, once ISIS members have entered the United States, it's quite easy for them to take up positions and embed themselves within sanctuary cities where lax immigration laws give them a veritable free pass to move around without fear of harassment from or detection by local law enforcement. Number 4, radicalizing Black American youth. There are also indications that recruitment and radicalization is occurring in various Black American communities in recent years. ISIS has publicly stated its desire to recruit African Americans and exploit unrest caused by police violence incidents to increase sympathy for its cause in the Black community. And there's a link for Heavy that you can check out. It says, in some of their recruitment media, ISIS has actually used Black Lives Matter talking points in an attempt to convince Americans to join the organization. And there's a link for Breitbart. And the article continues. It says, recently I came across a 9-month-long program Black Lives Matter has been running, labeled as Youth Empowerment Strategy Program at Dubai. The stated purpose of this program is to empower our youth with the knowledge, skill, and confidence to conduct themselves with poise and professionalism. And there's another link. Here's BLM's main web page with program visible in their event calendar, and another link. Here's the website for the program in Dubai, another link. It says, given that it is common knowledge Saudi and UAE state groups use educational programs as a way to radicalize youth and infect them with the Wahhabist ideology that breeds terrorism, what exactly is this program BLM is partnering with? Does it involve religious teaching? More research and demands for clarification when Black Lives Matter is needed to clarify that American youth are not intentionally being exposed to state agents who are radicalizing them. It's worth remembering that George Soros funds Black Lives Matter. And there's a link for Breitbart. The man who broke the Bank of England makes his money and gains control through sowing economic and political chaos. In fact, documents released by DC Leaks have proved that he used Black Lives Matter protests to further his agendas in the past. This current educational program and recent shifts toward extremist behavior should be alarming to many, given what is known about the way he uses the organizations. And there's a link to the Free Thought Project. Number 5, the United States government is neither negligently ignoring these facts or factions within it are attempting to prevent action from being taken to deal with ISIS. From what information is publicly available, ISIS or groups affiliated with them are creating and training paramilitary groups around the country, infiltrating American mosques to turn them into centers for radicalization and staging points of lone wolf-style attacks and attempting to engage in recruitment and radicalization campaigns among American minority groups. It begs belief that the United States government is not aware of these developments. In fact, Director Comey's statement about ISIS presence in all 50 states implies that intelligence agencies do in fact know of this threat. The State Department, who WikiLeaks have revealed to have illegally helped Hillary Clinton delay the process of turning email records over to Congress, has tried to deny that ISIS operatives are present on the U.S. southern border. And there's a link to Fox News. Their claims that Judicial Watch's reports are unfounded are in direct contradiction to the reports from over 10 years ago, which describe al-Qaeda terrorists operating in and around Mexico in attempts to gain entry to the United States, just as ISIS allegedly seeks to do now. And again, they do not explicitly deny the authenticity of the documents produced by Judicial Watch, because this would legally land them into very hot water. Other reports of government failure to tackle this apparent extremism exist as well. In 2016, the Daily Mail reported that the FBI had failed to inform American citizens that their names were present on a kill list of 15,000 potential targets compiled by ISIS. And there's a link to the Daily Mail. There are two conclusions to draw from incidents such as this. Either the U.S. government and the current administration is so hopelessly incompetent that they are unable to detect domestic and foreign threats which are discoverable by investigative journalists and whistleblowing organizations, or there are factions within the United States government who are seeking to prevent competent, well-intentioned members of the intelligence community, law enforcement, and legislative regulatory branches from taking action against ISIS operatives and extremist recruits who are active both on American border as well as in the United States. The fact that certain agencies and news groups have engaged in legalistic denials of reports about the growing ISIS threat to the United States certainly indicates that the latter might sadly be the case. So if you want to do some research on that and learn more about it, there's loads of links in that you can go to and check them out and see what's going on there. But I'll tell you, I'm hoping that when the swamp gets drained, that it gets drained of all those sleeper cells. That's needed to be done for a long time. I think that the current administration has done a lot to build that up instead of tearing it down. The next article we have here is off of Natural News. Draining the Pharma Swamp. Donald Trump announces plan to hammer Big Pharma's monopoly profits by requiring competitive bidding for government drug purchase contracts. In a welcome announcement during a press conference today, President-elect Donald Trump announced a plan to shatter the monopolistic pricing of Big Pharma that has been draining literally trillions of dollars from the government for the past 2 decades. Pharma has a lot of lobbyists and a lot of power, said Trump. There's very little bidding on drugs. We're the largest drug buyer in the world, and we're going to start bidding. We're going to start saving billions of dollars on drugs. Trump is referencing the fact that all former presidents in recent memory, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, have maintained what can only be called a monopoly pricing drug cartel in the United States, where the U.S. government pays outrageously high prices for prescription medications purchased by a Medicare, federal health coverage plans, and the VA hospital operations. The utter lack of competitive pricing has been kept in place by an army of pharma lobbyists, bribing complicit lawmakers and bureaucrats to keep high prices in place and eliminate competitive bidding for prescription medication purchase contracts. $324.6 billion a year in overpriced prescription medications to appease big pharma lobbyists. The federal government is spending hundreds of billions of dollars on overpriced prescription drugs each year, doling out a whopping $324.6 billion on prescription drugs in 2015 alone. Spending on prescription drugs outpaced all other services in 2015, says a Center for Medicare and Medicaid report entitled National Health Expenditures 2015 Highlights. That same report reveals that U.S. healthcare spending has now reached $3.2 trillion annually, or nearly $10,000 per person. If this spending isn't curtailed, it's going to bankrupt America and will soon hit an astonishing 25% of GDP, meaning $1 out of every $4 generated in the entire U.S. economy will be going to drug companies, cancer treatment centers, hospitals, doctors, and medical device manufacturers. High drug prices weaken U.S. worker competitiveness in global marketplace. Obviously, that rate of expenditure is unsustainable. It also makes U.S. workers far more expensive than workers in overseas regions, harming the economic competitiveness of U.S. companies. In order for the U.S. workers to remain competitive, U.S. healthcare costs need to be drastically reduced. And that means finally forcing drug companies to compete on pricing rather than receiving full retail monopoly pricing reimbursements from the federal government. Making America great again, in other words, means stopping the federal government from being ripped off by Big Pharma. Notably, Hillary Clinton's campaign accepted millions of dollars from Big Pharma sources, and there's little question that Clinton, if she had won the election, would have maintained the status quo of monopoly prices. And it says, see, Hillary Clinton will not challenge FDA monopoly, and if you support Hillary Clinton, you support Big Pharma and mandatory vaccinations. So those are two links that you can click on there if you want to hear more on that. In contrast, Donald Trump is genuinely draining the swamp by eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse across many sectors of the federal government. Big Pharma just got served. The era of easy profits and the compliant federal government writing unlimited fat checks is now coming to an end. Every American fed up with the unaffordable drug prices, outrageous health insurance premiums, and the corruption and influence of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. should applaud this announcement by Trump. The next article I have for you is off of BizPac Review. And it says, emboldened by Trump victory, Hungary plans to crack down on its native-born George Soros. Hungary plans on purging groups funded by the liberal mega donor George Soros following President-elect Donald Trump's presidential victory. Hungary and Prime Minister Viktor Orban's party will use all the tools at its disposal to target non-governmental organizations bankrolled by Soros, financier who has become one of the U.S. Democratic Party major sources of funding. Soros groups serve global capitalists and back political correctness over national governments. Lord Nemeth, the vice president of ruling Fidesz party, told reporters Tuesday. He was referring to the philanthropist's primary operator, the Open Source Institute, which advocates open borders and progressive politics. I feel that there is an opportunity for this internationally because of Trump's November 8th victory over former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Nemeth said. Lawmakers will debate legislation allowing the European Union members to audit NGOs according to the country's parliamentary agenda. Orban, who supported Trump during his bid for the White House, has made public his plans to build what he calls an illiberal state. He targeted Soros in the past, particularly the billionaires' NGOs. Soros gave nearly $10 million to Clinton's super PAC Priorities USA during the presidential campaign. He shoveled another $33 million into the group through Open Society Foundation, OSF, which he funds and controls, according to an August report from the Washington Times. Trump, for his part, also accused Soros of being part of a global power structure that is responsible for the economic decisions that have robbed our workers or our working class, stripped our country of its wealth, and put that money into the pockets of a handful of large corporations and political entities. The next one is off of Conservative Tribune, and it says, Obama sneaks massive uranium shipment to Iran just before leaving office. The Obama administration and other world powers approved a shipment of nearly 130 tons of natural uranium from Russia to Iran, senior diplomats told the Associated Press. The diplomats, who did not wish to be identified, said the move sought to keep Tehran committed to the nuclear deal and was designed to compensate the Islamic Republic for exporting 44 tons of reactor coolant that can be used to create plutonium for nuclear weapons. Tehran did not say what it would do with uranium, ABC reported. Tehran could possibly store it or enrich it and export it for use as reactor fuel. Iran has often said in recent months that it has no interest in developing uranium to make nuclear weapons, the AP reported. David Albright of the Institute of Science and International Security said the uranium could be enriched to make enough weapon-grade uranium for more than 10 simple nuclear bombs, depending on the efficiency of the enrichment process and the design of the nuclear weapon, the AP reported. The Jewish press pointed out last month, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani ordered the country's nuclear agency to develop nuclear engines that could use uranium enriched to 20%. That would imply a future violation of the 2015 nuclear deal, which allows Iran to enrich uranium to only 3.67%. This shipment can be described as many things, but it does not seek to keep Tehran committed to a nuclear pact. One would argue it does just the opposite. President Barack Obama has yet again sold out America to its enemies. His last days in office are turning out to be some of his worst. While Democrats fawn over Meryl Streep trashing President-elect Donald Trump, they have little to say about Obama's treasonous act as usual. And the final one in this episode is off of BizPac Review, and it says, the star witness on Jeff Sessions' alleged racism has deeply troubled history. Thomas Figures, an assistant U.S. attorney whose accusations of racial bias torpedoed Senator Jeff Sessions' nomination to the federal bench in 1986, has a history of erratic and disturbed behavior, colleagues and estranged families say. New sworn statements obtained by the Daily Caller News Foundation, given by former colleagues, allege Figures was a paranoid figure who, among other things, believed CBS Evening News anchor Dan Rather was communicating with him through his television. An office loner with a flair for confrontation, Figures was later was later indicted by federal authorities for attempting to bribe a witness. 30 years later, his testimony continues to shape press coverage of Sessions' nomination to serve as Attorney General in the Trump administration. Figures died in 2015. The star witness, a Democrat who joined the U.S. Attorney's Office during the Jimmy Carter administration, Figures was the first black man to serve as federal prosecutor in Mobile, Alabama, through a stalwart of local Democratic politics. He was vice chair of the Mobile County Democratic Conference, and his brother was state senator. Figures chose to remain on the staff of the district's new conservative U.S. attorney, one Jeff Sessions, following the election of former President Ronald Reagan. The pair worked together for 5 years. Sessions and Figures would part ways, if only for a moment, in 1985. 1 year later, Sessions was preparing for the exchange of platitudes typical of a committee hearing for the district judgeship when Figures scuttled his nomination with crippling allegations of racist sympathies. Invited by Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee to give testimony to his character, Figures alleged Sessions regularly called him boy in private and admonished him to watch his mouth around the office white employees. His allegations were not corroborated by any member of the Sessions staff. He also falsely claimed that Sessions ordered him to close his investigation of the lynching of the young black man named Michael Donald. Democrats on the panel peppered Sessions with biting questions and comments in the ensuing days. Mr. Sessions is a throwback to the shameful era, which I know both black and white Americans thought was in our past, Massachusetts Senator Edward Kennedy said during the proceedings. It is inconceivable to me that a person of his attitude is qualified to be U.S. attorney, let alone a U.S. federal judge. Figures was one of two witnesses who expressed concerns about Sessions' radical policies. The other witness, a civil rights attorney named J. Gerald Herbert, testifies that Sessions had made disparaging remarks about the ACLU and the NAACP. He went on to tell the committee that he did not believe Sessions to be a racist. Sessions' appointment floundered, and the White House withdrew the nomination on July 31st. A paranoid streak. Federal investigators said former colleagues say Figures routinely displayed a pattern of erratic and paranoid behavior. The DNCF exclusively obtained an affidavit given by former FBI Special Agent John Brennan, who worked with Figures while he was a federal prosecutor, that claims Figures often made strange claims. In sworn statement, Brennan says Figures once told him he believed the CBS News anchor Dan Rather was signaling him during his nightly news broadcast and relaying information he wanted Figures to use. Mr. Figures told me that CBS News anchor Dan Rather and other news anchors would glance off camera and were signaled when he was watching television. Brennan's affidavit reads, Mr. Figures claimed that once signaled, Mr. Rather or the other news anchors would speak directly to him from the television and tell him things they wanted him to do or would give him information they wanted him to have. On another occasion, Figures allegedly told Brennan he believed his home was bugged and asked him to execute a search of the house. The ensuing search did not turn up listening devices. In a related instance, Brennan says Figures told him he terminated a road trip from Mobile, Alabama to Dallas, Texas, because he believed a truck with a satellite antenna was following him. Brennan's statements corresponded to a second affidavit obtained by the DCNF given by Cheryl Crisana, an assistant U.S. attorney who worked with Figures from 1981 to 1985. Crisana alleges Figures was confrontational with colleagues and often made a secretary she shared with him cry. The affidavit mirrors claims Figures' ex-wife Janice made during the divorce proceedings in 1991. Crisana says Figures was suspicious of group's conversation in the office for fear he was the subject of discussion. He was very paranoid about any group in the office talking, always assuming that we were talking about him, the affidavit reads. In a nutshell, every one of us in that office was afraid of Thomas Figures, she added. Figures indicted. 6 years later, in 1992, Figures was indicted by federal prosecutors for attempting to bribe a convicted drug dealer. The kingpin, John Christopher, was preparing to take the stand against Figures' client, Noble Beasley, who was accused of attempting to distribute 11 pounds of crack cocaine. A letter written by Christopher's lawyer, Joseph Kolonsky, said that was obtained by the DCNF, claims that Figures presented himself as Christopher's lawyer in the docket room of the county jail and gained access to Christopher in a private meeting room. During that meeting, federal authorities allege Figures offered Christopher $50,000 not to testify against his client. At a trial, when confronted with recordings of his meeting at the county jail, Figures testified that he was attempting to lure Christopher into a criminal scheme so he could report him for attempted bribery. He was acquitted of all charges, though Beasley would go on to serve a life sentence. a narrative forged. Figures has since passed away, further calcifying a legacy of strained race relations. Account of Figure's testimony have appeared without reference to his dubious credibility on CNN, CBS broadcasts, as well as in print through the Associated Press, Vanity Fair, and the Daily Beast, among others. It's a matter of public record that Sessions supported the military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, the Defense of Marriage Act, and the Supreme Court's ruling in Shelby County versus Holder, which invalidated key provisions of the Voting Rights Act. However, remarks Sessions is alleged to have made behind closed doors, while widely disseminated in media, appear to rest increasingly untenable grounds. So there you have the second episode that I have for you this morning, with one more to follow. If you like what we're doing here, give it a thumbs up, share it on your social media so everybody gets to hear the news. Don't forget to subscribe. Click that bell beside the subscription box and check the little box there in it so that you get the email messages every time I put a show up, and that'll keep you informed. See you in the next one.